Welcome to the interview. Today's guest is Raptors play-by-play announcer Matt Devlin. Matt and I talk about how broadcasting is different in the bubble, lasting changes that COVID may bring, the use of technology in the NBA, the Raptors' playoff chances, skills required to pursue a career in broadcasting, how Matt continuously improves at his job, peers that he admires, and the list goes on. There's a lot of topics on here. Enjoy the show. So Matt, the bubble is alive. Some people say it's got a summer league feel to it because a lot of players show up to summer league. But in the case of the bubble, the entire NBA is there. It's almost like a trade conference for every single NBA player. What kind of opportunities does everybody being there at the same time sort of present itself?
Well, I think number one, it is like a summer league because when you think back to summer league in Las Vegas, 24 teams typically are represented there playing, but then you would also have members of all 30 teams there from a scouting standpoint, and then all the meetings that are held in Las Vegas from the NBA. And then I think it also has that feel, obviously, because it's dressed down. The coaches aren't wearing a suit and tie, and it's, the middle of the summer. So I think that adds to that element. But there's obviously, you look back to last night, Kyle and DeMar, watching, the Laker game and Clipper game and players being able to go to the different venues. There's 3 venues there to watch games. And so there's definitely that sense, that, the friendships that you have with other players that will continue. And then also, there'll be a bond created between players that get to know each other better over the course of that time. And specifically, that would be the case for all the teams, right? Based upon all the different activities that they have there. And when you think about, that time, for some, it's going to be, a quick time in the bubble. With respect to the 8 seeding games are coming up. And as we know, 6 of those teams ultimately will leave the bubble at the end of the seeding games. And then for the other teams, they're going to have the drive, obviously, for the title, which could take them into October.
And you mentioned the title there, and I was talking to Dave Hopla, who's a former Raptors assistant coach, and he made an interesting point. He goes, yeah, there for sure is going to be an asterisk next to whoever wins the title this year, but for a change, it's actually a positive asterisk because it might actually mean more to win a title in this constrained setting than you normally would because there's so many other aspects at play here. Alvin Williams mentioned the psychological aspect of playing in a bubble and how that might impact players. Winning a title is obviously hard, but winning it in this setting surely presents a whole new set of challenges.
I would agree with that. I agree with that. I think, when when all this was being discussed, as people were saying, "Oh, put an asterisk by it." Well, you can't put an asterisk by it unless you're going to say that this could be one of the most difficult titles to ever win based upon everything that, the players and coaches are putting aside to enter the bubble. And for the Toronto Raptors, of course, that started even prior to entering the Orlando NBA campus bubble because they had a pre-bubble for training camp. And that was going to Florida Gulf Coast University in the Fort Myers area and staying in Naples, Florida, and, having those 2 weeks leading up. And so, this is definitely going to be a experience that whoever emerges, it's going to be a strong-willed team. And that's why, for me, I believe the Toronto Raptors in the Eastern Conference are that team. They've been there before. They've done it before. They've shown how resilient they've been year in and year out. And then when you start thinking about from a defensive standpoint, all the different looks that they have, all the different things that they can do, the versatility. And that just, I actually speak about it quite often, but I don't know how often people do talk about this, that when you think about the ability to win a title, you have to have a versatile lineup. You have to have a roster that can play multiple styles. So many people, when you look at a team, will say, well, this is who we are. This is the sort of style in which we play. Yes, from a foundation standpoint and a core principle standpoint, those are the sort of things that you want to have. But you have to have the ability to be fluid and adapt. And Masai Ujiri and Bobby Webster have done an amazing job throughout the years of providing that from a roster construction standpoint. And then you have Nick Nurse, who is willing, who in the second round against, and all the numbers, against the Philadelphia 76ers, to play big when, in fact, Serge and Mark had played together all the 31 minutes during the regular season. He knew that in order to achieve what they wanted to achieve, which was ultimately win, that this is what they needed to do. They needed to play big. And so that is extremely important to have when you get into, this playoff mindset and mode, and then understanding the sacrifices that are made. And that is when even you look at the Raptors roster, how selfless they were last season. They have that in the sense that they're about one thing and one thing only, and that's winning. If they're going to show up and if the ball is going up in the air, they want to win.
You mentioned the pre-bubble bubble, which the Raptors went through. Are there other teams who also went through similar pre-bubble bubbles, or does that give the Raptors a bit of an edge because they had more time to kind of prepare?
Well, it's not that they had more time to prepare. The other teams and the other 29 teams were all allowed to go back to their training facility, right? And in each one of their cities. And so different for the Toronto Raptors in that they're the one team that is outside the U.S. here in Canada. And there's a 14-day quarantine, as we know, in place. And so as they were planning this with so many of the players, as we know, after their initial quarantine coming back from Utah on March the 9th, after that period, a lot of players did return home. And so the NBA allowed, and obviously understandably so, in the Raptors organization, when you take a look at everything and said, okay, what can we do in order to get that practice time? And the practice time in the pre-bubble bubble was following the regular protocols of what, the NBA had set out in the CDC, and how many players, could be on the court, shooting and all of those sort of different things. But anyway, the Raptors are the only team that did that. And that was just based upon with players stretched out not only over Canada, the United States, and then also Marc Gasol going back to Spain, that the best thing would be to, meet in Florida and have that time period there, which I think at the end of the day, getting coming back to your question, I do think that was a benefit in that they all came back together and that you're not, when you get done with practice, you're not just going home, right? You're together and you're experiencing, this a little bit before going into the bubble itself. But, we all follow NBA bubble life, and that gives us an opportunity to ultimately see a lot of the things that are going on inside the bubble. And the Raptors have put out some great videos, about, with Open Gym, as the time period in Naples and in Fort Myers, and then obviously right now inside the bubble in Orlando. But that's, my experience of what they're going through is coming through that video, and then listening to the players and reading and being on the Raps media availability calls, and speaking to Nick Nurse and Masai about, what is, life like inside that bubble.
So from a personal perspective, obviously your job has changed where you are calling the games remotely now. Can you walk us through what your setup is and how you call the games? Because obviously it's much, much different than what you're usually used to.
Yeah, so it'd be very much like anybody that's watching it at home, except for I have a microphone, and that is there's a big screen TV in front of me, and I'm calling the game off of a television monitor. A lot of work went into the planning because obviously there's a lot of different details and a lot of different scenarios, right? And those scenarios, based upon if Toronto became an NHL hub, which obviously it did, would the Blue Jays be able to play games? Right now, obviously, they're not from a home standpoint, but yet they were able to come to Toronto at the Rogers Center and train, and then also providing a facility from a COVID standpoint that there wasn't a lot of people moving in and out of the area in which you're calling the game, right? What can you do to create the safest, most sanitized environment in order to call the game? And then also understanding that, TSN is going to have a studio, Sportsnet will have a studio, and where are we going to be? So a lot, every game that is done for the Raptors and in broadcasting, the control room is actually out of a television truck trailer, right? Like a big 18-wheeler rolls in and there's a mobile studio or mobile control room inside, not a studio, but a mobile control room inside. And that's where the director, the producer, the technical director, the font coordinator, that's where everybody is. And so what they've done is we have that, and then also they created another mobile unit that inside they've created a mini studio, and where we're able to social distance with Jack and Leo and Sherm, who did the second scrimmage with me. And then we have robotic cameras in there, and we have a big screen television, have a desk, little area to put my notes and stuff, and have a dedicated headset that I wear, just like Jack and Leo and Sherm have a dedicated headset for them. And, we're the ones that plug it in and, unplug it and put it back in a bag. And we have a stats monitor. And then, typically you have a stage manager that lets you know when you're coming on the air, or if you have a card to read a promotion, they'll give you the card. Now, I have a monitor that will just flash up those reads for me to read. And it's a good size TV. It's 65-inch TV. And you watch the game and call the game, and you do the best you can, right? You don't see everything that you would when you're at home or on the road calling a game in person. But there's a couple of different things to that, and that is that I'd say 90% of the arenas, when you're calling an NBA game, you're calling the game what they call opposite camera side, right? So at home, you would see a player's left shoulder. While I'm calling the game, I'm opposite camera side, so I would see their right shoulder. And so while you're calling a game, I constantly will look up on the floor to see things live, and then also look at the monitor. And then there are cases where you're kind of looking at both. And the reason for that is that you're at home and you're seeing the person's right shoulder, I'm seeing their left shoulder. You just want to make sure that all of that is synchronized, right, when you're making the call. So in this situation, we're getting camera side, same look that everyone at home is getting. But the nuances and the feel and the ability to have conversations outside of specific media availability with executives, coaches, players, scouts, those sort of moments are lost. However, the Raptors have done an amazing job of providing media availability, and then also the ability for me before games to sit down and record via Zoom an interview with Nick Nurse. So you're still getting those sort of things. And then ultimately the ball goes up in the air and you just call the game, right? And you do the best you can based upon what you see at home. And it was great that we had 3 scrimmages because it allowed us to kind of work on, some of the technological issues and kind of get a feel and a sense. And we did the last game was also a dry run for ESPN in the U.S. It didn't go to air, but it's just a dry run. So there was just a lot of things because Chris Phillips and Dave Leader is the producer. Chris Phillips is a director. They have a lot going on in their television truck, right? Because they're taking feeds. We have one camera that's dedicated to us, and then the rest, you're cutting a show based upon these different, looks that are being fed to you. So it's not easy to do. But I think as the games continue on, we'll all be more, get more and more comfortable with it.
Usually when you go during a regular season, when you're in person, you come with your own camera crew, and the visiting team maybe has its own camera crew, and you have 2 separate broadcasts here. In the bubble, do you still have 2 sets of cameras supplied by each team, or is just one feed going out to everybody?
Yeah, so for us, during the regular season at home, we have our own dedicated camera crew. Even the crew that works for the opponent in Toronto are a crew that is put together from people that are here in the Greater Toronto area. We will travel members of our crew from camera, different other sort of different angles when we get into the playoffs, right? And each typically home team throughout the course of a season, they're responsible for crewing, these shows essentially. Okay. So you go into, different venues and, most of the time or a lot of the time you'll have the same crew members, but a lot of time you don't have the same crew members because there's other events going on, college football, the NFL, or a hockey game or whatever in that market area. So that is always a challenge. And that's why you always feel really comfortable when you have all of your crew members, at home. As far as how everything is being done through Orlando, it's more like the Olympics where you have what would be known as a world feed. And, you have dedicated camera personnel there, doing the game, and then you're taking all the different angles in and you're, cutting the game appropriately. We have one dedicated camera for us down in Orlando. Now, the national shows, ESPN and Turner in the U.S., they have upwards of like 25 different camera angles. You will see different camera angles that you haven't seen before, due in large part to, the venue not having fans there, right? And the ability with all these robotic cameras to be able to provide these different angles, right? That we haven't seen before. I noticed that last night when watching the 2 NBA games. So, typically the director, the producer, they'll be, specifically the director would be in communication with the camera people that are there on site doing the game. But in these situations, you're not. You're just in communication with one camera person. So if we are doing a story or if we're doing something that is specific to the Raptors, they can direct that camera person to get a shot of or a picture of, who we would be talking about. So there's definitely a lot of nuance and intricacies to all of this. And the great part is when the ball goes up in the air, fans can sit back and enjoy it and, hopefully, see a long run, for the Toronto Raptors.
What has the NBA learned so far? Like if you look at from a personal perspective, I'm not going back to a grocery store. I'm going on Instacart. It's a permanent change that COVID has probably introduced, or same with work at home. A lot of people are probably never going to go back to the levels of the office that they were pre-COVID. Are there some behaviors or cases where that were introduced by COVID that will become permanent or have a higher chance of becoming more or less sort of permanent changes in the NBA, the way the game is covered or the way the game is played?
Well, that I think continues to evolve. I can tell you this, that for me, the number one thing that I have seen on our three scrimmages or in our three scrimmages and then last night that I absolutely love and think that potentially you could see that later on. And again, we don't know what next season looks like, right? We don't know, to your point, right? There are just so many things, that behaviors that will change. But initially, one of the things that I really love from a viewing standpoint, and then also as an announcer, because during the course of the year, when you have coaches' challenges, so much of it is guesswork on what exactly they're looking at. We could have a producer and director that are listening in a little bit that could sometimes provide us a heads up. But I love through, the scrimmages and then the two games last night, when you go right to the scorer's table, they have a camera and they take the full mic of the official explaining exactly, what has transpired. And I think that from a fan standpoint and from a broadcasting standpoint, I really like. And that's just the first thing off the top of my head that you just mentioned. Hey, this is going to be something different. I could see them bringing that into all of the broadcasts on a go-forward basis, or all the games, where, they're looking at the two monitors. They've made the decision, are they going to reverse a call or is a call going to stand? They just move over. They have a microphone there. You could see, obviously, now there's a plexiglass, but there's a camera behind the plexiglass, and the official says, that call stands, or, that call is going to be reversed. And it just provides so much clarity to that moment instead of guesswork. Yeah.
It's like the NFL, right? I mean, they've been doing this for years where the referee just tells you exactly what happened. Going back to the third scrimmage that you mentioned against the Suns, that had a lot of technical experiments that were going on, and the Raptors' claw was slicing through players, and it was Twitter had a blast on that one. Did you see some more opportunities in integrating that technology during the games?
Look at last night. They had the shot clock right above the free throw line on the floor. Actually, all of the graphics that you will see on the broadcasts are all going to be virtual, except for the NBA logo in the middle and then Black Lives Matter. Everything else is going to be virtually put there. They have through the years, and the score bug, if you notice in the Raptors broadcast, you'll see, and the score bug is exactly that. It gives you the score, the time that's remaining, as well as the shot clock. They'll from there, put out who's on the floor, right? So there are times, obviously, where I'll mention who's on the floor, and then they'll also put, from the score bug, who's on the floor in both our TSN and Sportsnet shows. There's been that. There's been some other things that they have done from a technological standpoint through the years. But I think, now it provides an opportunity, as we know, to take a look at a lot of different things, right? And it's also, what we get used to as well, right? I mean, how many shows have you sat back and watched on Christmas Day, when they try a new camera angle? like with a camera that's actually moving with the player, right, from end line to end line. And the feedback, from that has not always been great, where people say, well, wait a minute, just give me, camera one. In the US, it's called camera one, which would be the main camera up top. In Canada, it's called camera two. Very much similar. You mentioned soccer, right? Soccer, you have that main full shot camera up top, right? And you're sitting on that for quite some time before you get into, some of the other cameras that you use. So in the NBA game, you have access to a lot of different cameras. And I think that there's always conversations about innovation and all that, but there's also an element to, at least the feedback that I get, and you let me know, for all of the different angles sometimes, and for all the different things that you try to add, at the end of the day, a lot of fans, their feedback to me has always been, hey, look, I just love the ball going up in the air, call the game, right? But I think that there's a level. I think there are some things that, based upon what we've seen, will be looked at and improved.
The places to shout out that you did, you had Malton the other day. Is that off the top of your head, or do you have like a list of things in front of you that you like, I got to get through these like 4 or 5 cities?
Every game varies. Malton, because Sherman Hamilton grew up there and he was with me calling the game. And a lot of it comes from people requesting on my Twitter feed, and I'll just go down the line and look at, different places that are asking for a shout out. There's really only been 2 times really, that I've gone in with a plan of, this is what I'm going to do. And I've mentioned this before, but in game 1 of the NBA finals, I mentioned the 13 capitals of the provinces and territories. And amazingly enough, the Raptors made 13 threes. Now, don't ask me if they made 12 who got left out. I didn't have a list of where I was going next, or this first and that second, or whatever. And if they made 14, I don't know where I would have gone. So they made 13. It worked out perfectly. And then game 2, which I've shared before, Canada, as you know, over the last 3 years has led the NBA in players outside of the U.S., right? Representing a country. Canada has been second only to the U.S. in NBA players. And so out of respect for those players, I gave shout outs to the cities in which they were either born and or they grew up in. And so, I did that. And then after that, I went back to just, whatever was showing up on my timeline, and just hopefully making people smile and have a good time with it. 'Cause that's really the intent of it is, the first one I ever did. It's not anything. Look, at a lot of people have used that over the last, 50, 60 years of broadcasting, whether it be in baseball or basketball, with respect to he hit the ball all the way to Oakville, and, he made that shot all the way from Mississauga, right? It has to do with the depth on the court. And that's where it started. And then, people were, in the day and age of social media, they really, enjoyed it. And, if I can, kind of provide some of that in the context of a basketball game, in a basketball community, it's been a lot of fun. It's been great.
Who scares you most in the East?
There's really not a team. I think that the Raptors, each one presents different challenges. Milwaukee does, right? We know that with Giannis. I think Boston's a team that you can't forget about. because they have some dynamic players. Philadelphia, we know, how big they can play and be and how difficult. But I think, not having JJ Redick is something that could affect them. But I think that those are the four teams in the East. But I don't look at any one of those teams and say, yeah, the Raptors can't beat that team in a best of seven. I think they can beat all of those teams in the best of seven. And a lot of that has to do with their defense. I think that the Raptors are the best team in the East. They're a team that you can tell from everything you've read and heard from the Raptors. They're in that bubble to win it. Their focus, we talked about this a little bit earlier on, just about how, they have that will and drive to get it done. But I think their ability to be so adaptable, as we talked about earlier, with the versatility of their roster, and then Nick Nurse's willingness and the players' willingness to play and defend differently than every other NBA team, to me, really makes them the team in the East.
You're putting a premium on versatility as that being an advantage for the Raptors and their ability to play different styles.
1,000%. I think that was one of the things that really solidified for me during that run. I think if you look at all championship caliber teams, their ability to play multiple styles based upon who they're playing against in that moment really is what separates them. Because as we know, not every game is going to go according to plan, right? Not every game, is going to, unfold the way you see it. Can you adapt during the course of that game? Can you read the situation? And, can you evolve within the flow of a series? The idea of this is who we are and we are going to stay true to this. I think there's an element of that, but we saw it in the Philadelphia series, right? It was adjust and play bigger, right? And if they didn't do that, would they have been able to win that series in 7 games? I don't know. I think that a lot of it had to do with, as I mentioned before, Masai and Bobby doing an amazing job of creating a roster that allowed Nick to go in different ways based upon different matchups, right? And so to me, that really, when you look at it, puts the Raptors in a different category. And then you get through Philadelphia and you take on Milwaukee, and then all of a sudden it's Norm and it's Fred again, right? You get it against Golden State and it becomes, another opportunity for Fred and, different players, right, to step up and emerge. So I do think versatility is a lot. That does not say that the Raptors don't have core beliefs and principles, and this is what 1,000%, and specifically they do on the defensive end, right? Specifically they do on the defensive end, and then, their offense, really flows, from their defense. So to me, they're really difficult to handle. They really are because of that ability to play multiple styles.
Yeah, it's for sure. I mean, and speaking of players who are versatile, OG has been pretty damn good in the first 3 scrimmages. Struggled maybe a little in the first game, but I mean, from my perspective, like I've seen him like put the ball on the floor with great confidence. Maybe something that I hadn't seen as much before. What has sort of stuck out for you as what's been different about OG?
Well, I think it's interesting. Yesterday, the broadcast crew spoke with Adrian Griffin, who is lead assistant for the Raps, and we're talking about different players, OG and Norman Powell. Norman Powell specifically, just the growth of his game, and how people don't realize how challenging this league is on a night in and night out basis, maybe, and we've seen how Norm, here it's taken him 4 years plus, right, to really get comfortable, and we've seen that, and for OG. Let's not forget, he comes in off of an ACL, does, play a lot as a rookie. And then, last year, the injuries and the role and who he is, changing, evolving. And I think he spent a lot of time, during the hiatus working on his ball handling skills. To your point, I think he showed that. I think that's still a growth. He's only 22 years of age in his third season. And so that will, continue. We know what he can do as a defender. We've seen it, whether it's guarding a James Harden, whether it's guarding multiple positions. And that's the same thing that could be said for, somebody like Pascal Siakam, where, last year you really saw Pascal evolve, where he was handling the ball, initiating the offense. You're going to see even more of that, now. And, the ability to play multiple positions. We've seen him play, essentially 1 through 5. We've seen him guard 1 through 5. And, all those sort of interchangeable parts and the development of the players, to me, is one of the reasons why, the Raptors are the best, one of the best organizations. You think about the utilization of the 905 and what they've been able to do. You think about Terrence Davis and his rookie year as an undrafted player. When you start talking about players like the Raptors are producing, that is up there with the great years of San Antonio and the reputation they had, or the Miami Heat under Pat Riley, the reputation that they had for developing players. And it says a lot about the Raptors organization. It says a lot about, the players as well.
You call multiple sports, and you've been a professional broadcaster for decades now, basketball, baseball, tennis. Is there one particular skill that is required of broadcasters that younger people who are aspiring to have a place in sports media or become broadcasters, that they should sort of work on if they want to pursue a career like yours? And, the reason I mentioned the different sports is that, we always have specialization, and that we need to know a little bit more about basketball to talk about basketball, need to know a little bit about baseball to talk about baseball. But are there some core skills that are like common across just any sport you call that you would encourage younger people to develop?
Well, that's a good question. Leads me to a lot of, potential answers here. Number one, as you mentioned, I've called a lot of different sports: football, basketball, baseball, wrestling at the Olympics, tennis, decathlon, track and field at Olympics, synchronized diving for NBC at the Olympics. You have to love preparation. You have to love individual stories, team stories, the amount of, prep work. I don't know, if people realize, the amount before you get on the air to what's done, reading and researching. And back when I started, that was getting magazines and newspaper clippings and, keeping file folders of everything. And, then it evolved into sports information directors or PR people FedExing overnight, everything to you. And then it evolved to what was called fax back, where you typed into the fax machine and you could actually get stats immediately, right? Uh-huh. Which was absolutely amazing, right? And now, as we all know, you can go on the internet and you can, the websites that I use for my research, you can log on to, right? So that's why, to me, it ends up, coming back to, the skill of calling the game, recognizing the moment, and then also having and developing the relationships that allow you to share a story or two that you don't have access to online, right? And that's why it's important to develop the relationships with the coaches and executives and scouts and players in order to find some of those nuggets that you can use on a broadcast. But I've seen it go from, every morning going down to the corner newspaper stand and, buying, 10 newspapers, right? And, just cutting, pasting, and doing all those sort of things. And there's a lot of what I do that's still handwritten, because that's and color coded, based upon, I have so many markers and highlighters and all those sort of different things, because that's what I've done and that's evolved. The prep work has evolved over the years. The one thing I used to always carry around the NBA official guide and the NBA register, which had all these different, stats and records and player bio information. And now, of course, you can download it on your iPad, right? So my backpack has become certainly not as heavy. And the media guides and all the other different things that you used to get, now you can get all online. You ultimately have to be comfortable with the way that you call a game. And just like I'm calling a game right now off of a television monitor, I would, if you want to become a broadcaster, and now look at on your phone, you can voice record. Back in the day, I had a cassette tape, right, with a microphone, and I would, turn down the sound of games, and I would try to call the game. And you're typically your own worst critic, so you'll know if you're doing it, doing it the way you want to do it, what you may or may not get comfortable with, and know what you may need to work on. But that's certainly, something that's, important, to get comfortable with your own voice. And, the only way you get better is by doing it. I don't know that there's anybody born to be a broadcaster. I think that it's something that, if you're passionate about, if you love it, if you're willing to really work at it, that you can become a broadcaster. And that was certainly the case for me. I mean, I never even thought about doing play-by-play until I was actually in the industry, where I graduated from school and was working as a local NBC sports reporter and weekend anchor. I didn't know that it was really possible at the time to become a play-by-play announcer. I initially was just like, hey, I want to be on TV and do the 6 and 10 o'clock or 6 and 11 o'clock sports. And then, I really, sat back and thought about what I really wanted to do. And that was be there calling a game live, where there isn't a script. And so that's ultimately what led me down the road of doing high school games and minor league baseball games and college basketball games, and everything until in 1999, Adam Silver, who's now the commissioner, was the VP of NBA Entertainment, and they were starting a channel called NBA TV, and I was hired to be a host. But in addition to that, I was still doing college play-by-play for basketball in the greater New York area, and I tried to, just keep getting better at both. The great thing about NBA TV Canada is they replay the games right in the morning. And so I'll wake up in the morning and as I prepare for the next day, I'll listen to the games and try to understand, okay, hey, could I have said something different? Could I have done this differently? Did I have enough energy? Should I have done this or that? And that's all kind of a work in progress. And you try to continue to get better, even at my stage, for sure. I do watch and listen, for sure I do. Because I think, that's something that, if you're really, I love doing what I do, right? I love calling games and I want to get better, right? And there's, whether it's any sport that I call, I'm always analyzing. And there's a part early on in your career where you can definitely overanalyze, right? And it's the old line of paralysis by analysis, right? Where you think too much instead of just reading and reacting, right? Like a player. And so there's a little bit of, okay, hey, you're stepping into the booth, you're going to call, or you're there courtside at the broadcast position, call the game, and then analyze it after, right? Instead of analyzing it as you go. So it's definitely, something that, you have fun with. And, I think everybody can tell, we love to have fun on the game, and the game always dictates where you go. That's number one thing to me from a broadcasting standpoint. The game will let you know where to go. I have a ton of preparation in front of me. And notes and everything I keep, do I utilize all of them? No, I don't. But some games you may need all of them or some of them, and sometimes you don't need any of them, right? Because the game will let you know if it's a tight game. And also, I will tell you this, that's changed and evolved, right? The conversations on the air have changed and evolved because the possessions are up. A 20-point lead is no longer a 20-point lead like it was when I started. A 20-point lead can evaporate in 3 shots, right? 3 misses on one end, 3 shots on the other end. It's an 11-point game, and all of a sudden there's a timeout. And so all of that has evolved and changed as well. We know with all the offensive rule changes and the shot clock being adjusted on an offensive rebound from 24 to 14, the game is quicker, right? So that changes things. And those are all different things that I sit back, listen, watch, learn, talk to other professionals about, and try to get better in hopes that you're providing, the fans, the very best that you can.
Is there a play-by-play person out there that you admire?
Well, I think there's multiple people. There's not just one person. Somebody that is a very good friend of mine who, in the late 90s, when he ended up becoming the full-time radio voice he was already the full-time radio voice, but then became the television voice of the New York Knicks, Mike Breen. I'll never forget, he was very influential to me. Our friendship is lasting. We talk about, different ways of preparing and all those sort of things. I think, Marv Albert has certainly set a standard on the air. I think Kevin Harlan, who also I count as a friend, is somebody that I, really enjoy listening to. And there's so many of the announcers in the NBA you get to know over the years and, have a good relationship with. But as far as bouncing stuff off of, Mike Breen and I, have talked a lot over the years. And Ian Eagle and I, because I started in New York, or not started, but I was there, for a good stretch at Madison Square Garden Network, and Mike was there at that time. Gus Johnson, was there at that time. Kenny Albert was there. So, I mean, there was just, a bunch of announcers that was always great to kind of catch up to and ask questions to. Al Trotwig, I remember he's, an announcer at MSG that always would do the Olympics. And the first Olympics I ever did in 2004 in Athens, I asked him a lot of questions about, how to cover an Olympic sport that you haven't called before. And, he was great. There's a lot of announcers out there, and there's not just one. From baseball, I remember in 1993 meeting Tom and Jerry. I was a broadcaster for the Palm Springs Angels. On an off day, I traveled up to Anaheim to watch the then California Angels play the Toronto Blue Jays. And prior, I got there early, 3-4 hours before the game. And in baseball, different from basketball in that there's a booth, right? And I was able, obviously, through the Angels, because the Palm Springs Angels were a single A affiliate in the California League of the Angels, to get a press pass. And, I introduced myself to Tom and Jerry and said, hey, Matt Devlin, I'm a, single A broadcaster, from Palm Springs Angels. Would you mind, if I sat in the back of the booth and just listened to how you call a game? And they were both so welcoming. In fact, Jerry said, hey, send me a tape and I'll get back to you and give you some pointers. And he certainly did that. I still have the letter to this day. Tom was exceptional. He said, how do you keep score? What kind of scorecard do you use? And, he said, I got this from Jack Buck, and he ripped it out of the back of this book. And he said, here, you make copies of this. You can use this. This is how again, you have to understand 1993, nobody had computers, right? You're getting all of your numbers, you're handwriting all of your numbers. You're, getting box scores out of the newspaper. At the minor league level, you're keeping track of everything yourself, at bats, walks, all that. He had all that information that he would keep as well. And so he showed me everything that he did. So all those sort of things, really stand out. Jack Buck, Joe Buck's father, who's a legendary voice of the St. Louis Cardinals, listening to him, being able to sit in the back of the KMOX radio booth when I worked for the Springfield Cardinals in Springfield, Illinois in 1992, was certainly impactful. And a lot of that was just conversations about, how to be better and what can you do and practicing and all those sort of things. So there hasn't been just one person. There's been a collective, but at the end of the day, I think any announcer out there, you have to ultimately call a game the way. I remember a broadcaster telling me, you end up calling the game the way you like to listen to it. And I thought that was really interesting, right? And, I think there's a lot of truth probably in that. But I think some of that too evolves over the years. And, but there, certainly along the way, there's been, some great conversations about, the art of calling a game. And it's those friendships are I'm very grateful for those.
Matt Devlin, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
You got it. My pleasure. Thank you.